Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Red Letter Leadership Podcast, where we seek to grow you as leaders, but through that, growing you closer to Christ, closer to our Savior, because we believe that He is the greatest leader of all time, and He is truly the source of all leadership. So I think you're going to love this topic. Love in a sense of it's going to speak to you, maybe not one that
Was that a
any
pun?
of us,
Did you say speak to you intentionally
yeah, the topics speak to you.
because of Zachariah? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So Eric kind of gave a little foresight into what we're going to be talking about. So a few weeks ago, we brought up the differences between how Mary, the mother of Jesus, responded to Gabriel coming to her and saying, "You're going to be with child," and how Zachariah responded to Gabriel, probably about what was that, like 6 months before Mary,
It
and
was exactly 6 months, yeah.
how he doubted, and then Gabriel said that wouldn't be able to speak. So now, 9 months after he spoke to Gabriel, John the Baptist is being born. And we're gonna look at that, the lessons pulled out of that passage, and we're gonna be really getting into how our sufferings, in this case, Zachariah's suffering of being mute for 9 months, how our sufferings can be seen as God's grace. And if we would really look at them from that perspective, it certainly will take humility on our part. But when we look at that from the perspective of them being God's grace, how it can give us opportunities for growth and truly provide a testimony that points people to Jesus. So we want to look at those from a couple areas, one being personal growth, just in our own lives, like what types of failures, where have we doubted God? Um, and where he kind of stayed with us and walked with us through those doubts like he did for Zechariah, because he could have chosen somebody else. When Zechariah doubted, he could have just said, "Yep, forget you. I'm going to go to another family, and John the Baptist is going to be born from that family." But he didn't do that. And by his grace, he sticks with us because he wants to use us. He comes to us because he wants to use us. And I think he works with us through those challenges. Another perspective we want to look at is leading a team. Sometimes as leaders, we're going to have people underneath us that we're responsible for who have a failure. Are we going to work with them through those challenges, or are we just going to bail on them? So those are some perspectives that we have from this lesson. But I would like to just look at a couple verses from this passage. We're going to be looking at Luke 1. I'm going to start with verse 62. So there, John was born. Some relatives come in. The mother, Elizabeth, said that his name's going to be John. The relatives were like, none of us, none of the relatives have this name. So verse 62, he said, then they made signs to his father. Again, they know he was mute for 9 months. They're still thinking he's mute, to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, his name is John. Immediately his mouth was open and his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak, praising God. The neighbors were all filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about these things. Everyone who heard the wonder about it asking, what then is this child going to be? For the Lord's hand was with him. So out of a book, I just want to read a passage that or a sentence really that kind of struck me, that has stood out. Really, by God's grace in making Zechariah mute, Zechariah's silence prevented him from spreading his doubt to his fellow priests. Of course, he was ministering in the holy place. So by God muting him, it prevented him from spreading his doubt to his fellow priests and to his wife Elizabeth. So in that sense, we could look at the grace of God shielding him from the repercussions of his lack of faith. And I think many of us see consequences and we get so focused on the consequences and we think, oh, poor me, I'm not deserving of this, or why is this happening to me? When really, if we change our perspective a little bit and start looking at just asking God why, I think He'll, when we have a humble heart, I think He'll give us an answer. And I think a lot of it, He will show us His grace. So, Eric, with that said, what kind of thoughts do you have on our sufferings, consequences we're dealing with being God's grace? Because sometimes it's the enemy's attacks. Certainly in Zechariah's situation, it wasn't an attack from the enemy; it was a consequence that God issued to him.
Yeah, that's a good question, Jordan. So thanks again for having me on. It's good to be here.
Of
This is a good
course,
topic. I think it's important for us to really wind this back to the beginning of Zechariah's story to really get an understanding of what happened, because this is interesting. Okay. So he was a priest, right? And I'm thinking he was a high priest. He drew, I don't know if you want to call it the short straw or the long straw, but they cast lots to who was going to go into the innermost, the most holy of high places with the ark. They burn incense and they do it yearly, right? While he was in there, oh, I mean, because if you look at, we've talked probably on this podcast before, there's, the temple is the outer court, then we're the only Jews and Gentiles, and the inner court, we're all Jews, and then only Jewish men, and then only priests. And then the next one's only high priest, and only the most high priest once a year. And so it's like kind of like it concentrically shrunk to who could go in there. And only once a year, and they drew straws and they grabbed, I think they tied a rope to the person in case he died in there, struck
yeah,
dead, pull him out. Well, old Zechariah drew the straw to go in and burn the incense. And so whether he was like, this is awesome or oh crap, I'm not sure. But
right,
while he was in there, and again, and he was in there by himself, he had a vision. No, he didn't have a vision. Like the angel Gabriel appeared to him. Like he was sitting there. He's like, "Hey, bro, you're here too? You got something for me?" And he's like, "Yeah, in fact, I do." And he said, "Look here, here's what's going to happen, Zechariah. I need you to know this. Your wife, who's been barren her whole life and she's advanced in years, and by the way, similar to, I don't know, Sarah or Sarai, right? All these crazy things happen when, they've been barren for years. Mary was a virgin. She wasn't barren for years, but Elizabeth was, and it was, remember the cousin of Mary. And he was like, and the angel Gabriel's like, "Hey, Zechariah, guess what? She's going to be pregnant, and he's going to foretell or bring in the Lord Most High." Geez. And then he goes into a litany of what that means and what this Lord he's going to do. Oh, by the way, Jordan, Elizabeth was of the line of Aaron, the Most High priest from the very beginning, which they said your son's going to be in line with the prophet Elijah. Oh, by the way, Elijah's linked to Aaron as one of the from the Levitical priest line. So this thing is not by accident, right? Yet another thing that's like not an accident. They chose her. And so yeah, John the Baptist, and that's who they're foretelling, but then Zechariah says, "Well, hold on. How will I know this will be so?" And at that moment, Gabriel's like, "Oh, you doubt?
yeah,
You're the high priest, bro. You're doubting? Okay, so now because of that doubt, I can't have you spreading that around over the next several months. And so you're mute now, bud. So you can't talk." And so that's kind of where your story picks up. So like when they're naming the baby post birth, right? But the point here is that that's kind of the preview of the Zechariah and John the Baptist story. And in the spirit of Elijah, he brings forth and baptizes Jesus and brings them to the Most High, the Lord Most High, which was foretold his coming, which is why this whole story is crazy. But when your question is about suffering and God's grace in this, and it's important to understand that sometimes we're going to learn lessons that aren't going to be the nice way. Because if people, like in Zechariah's exact example, and like you and me, Jordan, if we were to have a vision or God were to speak to us through prayer or some other type, we hear the voice of God, would we be like, cool, I'm going to do exactly what you say, and it's unquestionably the voice of God, I'm moving out on that? Or would we be like every other human in history, include this one, Zechariah, was like, but dot dot dot, and it doesn't matter what comes after the dot. There would be a pause and the word but in the middle. But how, or but when, or but with
Or
what?
is that really you, God? Is that I don't really
Yes, and we
yeah.
wouldn't trust it, man. And so the point is, like, we're like, well, why must we suffer? And I'm going to hand it back to you. But so to set this up, though, like, why must we suffer to learn lessons? And the answer is simple, because we wouldn't listen otherwise.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
Right? Prove it. And even after, we've seen a miracle happen, how long one, would we acknowledge it for what it is? And two, how long will it be until we had forgotten that it actually happened, or we would start to disqualify it? If people are not able to just have blind faith and it work out perfectly, it will never happen. You will always question, we're a fallen people. And so we then, therefore, need to learn lessons other ways, and also known as the hard way. And so the question out of the gate is, why must people suffer to learn? It's because they have no choice. They wouldn't learn it the easy way because people aren't capable of learning the easy way.
Yeah, 100%. And we see this all the way back into the beginning of the Bible, right? To like, especially the Israelites coming out of Egypt, all the incredible signs and wonders,
Great point.
the parting of the sea, and then they start complaining, they're bickering. And then even as God's given them
And
the
questioning
resources,
and
the
asking,
food,
yeah,
yeah, they
exactly. And
start
doubting.
questioning. I was just reviewing some notes from reading I did a year or so ago where, I think it was Korah and his little sidekick who were rebelling against it was in number 16, I think. They were rebelling against Moses, and they're pretty much saying like,
And hey, look, for the folks out there, if you're looking for something to get you jazzed up about reading, don't start in Numbers. But go ahead, George.
yeah. I've actually gotten kinda into numbers over the
Numbers
past
is the
year, but
place where
it
Bible studies go to die, right? Because,
numbers
like,
is much better than Leviticus, for
buddy,
sure.
yes, you get through, Genesis and Exodus, and you're kind of like catching some steam. And then you run into the buzzsaw of Leviticus. Be like, well, maybe the next one will be better. It's worse. Maybe. And you're like, and so you never even get to the Deuteronomy, which then picks up, some interesting things in Joshua. Okay, now we're back.
Yeah,
Like,
now we're back. Yeah.
but sorry, that was a rabbit hole. But Leviticus and Numbers are where Bible studies go to die. Because you start in, like, I'm just gonna start at the beginning and I'm gonna read to the end, and you never make it past those two.
Yeah, but even these, and I'm pretty sure they're in the Levi family, so they're priests, but they're pretty much saying, like, "Who are you, Moses? Like, why do you think you're the top dog here? Maybe we can do what you're doing." And Moses is just
Well,
like,
try it, bud.
"Are
Here's
you
the staff.
serious
Go make
right
some
now?"
water. Yeah.
He's like, "Look, I'm just doing what the Lord's telling me to do. You guys wanna try and take my spot, have it." Like,
Go
I
ahead.
tried to battle with the Lord at the burning bush. I tried to be like, "No, send somebody else." He's like, "Nope, sending you." So I'm just fulfilling my role. Like, if
Yeah.
you guys think I'm,
You think I
power
want to
hungry,
be
I'm
here?
not.
I lived with the Pharaoh, bro. I had everything I ever wanted. And
Yeah.
now I'm stuck in this barren desert with you goofballs for 40 years because you won't listen. You doubted. I sent you out to check the promised land. We're going there, and 10 of the 12 of you came back with a problem. And so now I'm stuck here with you, having to provide. And this isn't any fun, or is it easy? I don't know how we got on Moses, but you're right. You are right.
Anyway, so I say
But
all
they was
that to
suffering. They did.
yeah. I say all that just to, again, reiterate your point, like, from the beginning of time, we have been hearing from God. He's been speaking to us. He's been wanting to use us. He's been wanting to bless us. All those things, and we've been like, "No, like, is that really you, Lord?" Or, "No, I'm complaining. I'm gonna complain about what I don't have," when really you've given me all. I remember, for a youth group lesson, I was, uh I was just kinda sharing what sin looks like, and in the Garden of Eden, you have this enormous, like, beautiful garden, and God's like, "But there's this one tree. I don't want you eating from that one tree.
Just
Everything else
one.
is everything." And so I was like, picture, like you're a kid in timeout, right? Or you're in this big room but you got to face the corner. Like you can have everything else in the room, but you decide that you want what's in that corner. So you turn around and you face the corner when God's like, no, 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 I'm trying to give you everything else in the room. And you're like, nope, I just want to stand here and face this corner. I just want this one thing you're telling me I can't have. So if we just let God show us the incredible blessings he has for us, and if we just trust him with that, I think that's the biggest thing is that we lack the trust. Despite on how many
No
times
question.
he shows his grace, his mercy, his blessings, we're always like, yeah, but I don't know if I can. I mean, I think I can do a better job. I think I have a better way." And so you
That's
get
right.
like Zechariah and you're like, "Well, how can I be sure of this?" I was thinking reading it, I was thinking, well, I mean,
Because he's
if you
like, that
if you
sounds
you could
crazy.
you could just wait like a month, and then you'll see that your wife is with
Yeah.
child, or 2 months or whatever. But you could just be patient. You don't e like, you don't even have to lash out, and that God wants to he wants to give us the promises he has for us. He wants to speak those to us, and then us to start taking faith-fueled steps of action towards that before we see how he's going to do it. And what we wanna do is we just wanna see the how right now. But yeah,
And then we
Lord,
question if it's true.
I
Yeah.
get it, but I wanna see the how. And by God's grace, he
Is
disciplines
this
us.
where comes the phrase, show me the baby?
Show me the no, I haven't heard that phrase.
You
Show
ever
me the
heard
baby.
that?
I've heard
Yeah.
show me the money.
Like, I don't care about all the details, just show me the baby. Is this the Zechariah story?
Yeah,
It's like,
maybe.
I don't got it, Gabriel. Show me the baby. How am I gonna know? I don't know. I doubt it. Well, here's
Yeah,
the thing
so
about it. Yeah.
so so with that, I mean, I guess I'm gonna put you on the spot some, Eric, but, like, in
Yeah,
your
do it.
personal life, can you recall a time where God was wanting you to go in a certain direction and maybe you doubted or you wanted to see all the steps in front of you, and when you didn't, you kinda took matters into your own hand?
Yeah, no, I think yes, I have some instances, and so it starts with answer to answer that question, George. Like, how much of a Calvinist are you? Meaning, like, how much do you believe in purely predestination and zero destination predestination? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
For me, I like to, 'cause, and I forget where it's at, but I don't know if it's Jesus or Paul or but where he says, "All are called, but few are chosen." I think Jesus says that somewhere. All are called, but few are chosen. And I don't think that's I'm not gonna get into the theology of predestination just because I haven't studied it enough. But when I think about all are called, few are chosen, I think the ones that are chosen are the ones who answer the call, are the ones that truly love God and obey him, which is what he commands us to do. He commanded
Yeah,
the Israelites to do that in the Old Testament, and then Jesus really what I've seen is in John 14 where he's, at the last supper and he's telling them, "Love me. I am in the Father and the Father is in me. So we're the same one. Love me, and the way you do that is by obeying my commands."
right. And
And I
so
think those are the ones that are chosen.
I agree, but I don't think pure Calvinists could square the amount of decision making you have whenever to answer your questions. Like, yeah, I've been at positions where I could tell you that, like, I'm somewhere in the middle. Things are predestined to happen, but it doesn't necessarily the road to get there isn't already paved. It's
And
got some twists and turn. He'll
I
get you
also
to where he
think
wants you to
sorry.
go. It just maybe not the way you're expecting to get there. And so for me, unless you want to jump in, but for me,
Yeah, I do. With predestination, the way I kinda look at it too is you have to understand that we serve an all-knowing God. So he knows every decision you're going to make. It's our free choice to make it, but he knows what decision you're going to make in everything, right? So he knew that Judas Iscariot, was going to be called by Jesus to be one of the 12, that he was going to answer that call, that he was going to serve as one of the 12, but then he would betray him. So here's what I think, because I truly believe in the idea of free choice. Like God gives us all free choice to serve Him or not. I think God from before time, He knew those choices that Judas would make, and He fit His plan into those. So
He
His
will
plan
use
is
it. Yeah, he
going
will
to,
use it. He will use it. Yeah, he'll use it.
yeah, His plan is going to come about. No one's going to stop His plan. Why? Because He already fit His plan into everybody's choices. All are called. He wants everybody to be saved, but He knows that many are going to choose that that's not for them, that they don't wanna have anything to do with.
And I could tell you that I would, again, like you are, I would argue that, like, you and I were meant to be here from the beginning. I didn't realize that at the time, but like, and I was trying to, it to not to, it wasn't a malicious thing, but I was fighting it per se, or I was, spitting the bit on it because, like, 'cause my wife and I grew up Methodist, she grew up Catholic. Did I know I'd be a Baptist? No. But the way that we got there is that we couldn't decide in our marriage on which church we were going to. And, kids went to Methodist preschool. They'd go to mass on Sunday when I was gone on deployment. They would, I mean, they were like Catholic heavy. When I got back, they were Catholic light, And so, but we could never agree on how to raise our kids, which is another different podcast in and of itself with marriage stuff. But ultimately, Christina and I went through some things that showed us, 10 years ago or so, that showed us together like we probably need to get some of these things figured out. And we decided at the time to go to a church that neither one of us even ever thought we'd go to, a non-denominational church with a Baptist flavor. And that was the beginning of the me and her, the us revolution, like born again. The whole family
Awesome.
has since been baptized. We're leading ministries in the church, right? We have a book we put out, it has about Christ's leadership. We got this podcast, we got the other podcast, like, and make people have come to Christ because, like, and not because of anything we did, but because he put us on our backs. Because a lot of times when you're on your back, the only place to look is where, Jordan? Up. And you finally submit to his will. And so some people are just a little more thick-headed, and I was one of them, and stubborn, and like we don't want to submit to his will. He has a plan, but ultimately he will see it his way, and it's either the easy way or the hard way, but that's the thing. But the suffering there at the time, we saw it as a suffering. Why are we going through this? Why are we doing that? But now we look back, and that suffering was actually a blessing. To your earlier point, it's a blessing because one, it got us to where we are today. That without that we wouldn't have been. And oh, by the way, that curse then was someone else's blessing now. So what we went through, we could give a young couple today and give them advice that they don't have to go through it. So to them, that's a blessing. To us at the time, we felt like it was a curse, but basically you're just building your witness. And so that's the main takeaway here. Like, you have to learn lessons, and we've already established the only way that humans can learn is the hard way, because we wouldn't listen otherwise, because we have too much doubt and we've got the fallen nature in us. But it really comes down to perspective and how, and it's hard to do in it, and that comes back to trust, which you said a minute ago. We have a hard time with it. But now, once you've walked through those Psalm 23 valleys of the shadow of death and you've seen that evil, you did fear it, but now you don't, because you're like, I saw the worst we could have gone through and I saw what happened on the backside of that. It's like recruit training or OCS, or training for combat. You go through worse so that when you're downrange, what's not as bad seems easy. You know, like, you
Yeah,
don't train for less and expect more. You train for more and hope for less.
right.
It's the same thing. I'm going to put you through the worst, because then when you're dealing with sufferings now, I now have more trust and faith than I ever have when I'm dealing with sufferings, quote unquote sufferings, like Zechariah did, or I'm approached with things that I don't necessarily have the answer to. I can say, look, he led us through that. He'll let us through this. I'm trusting him to do that. And then I just empty myself of internal thought and say, speak to me and lead me in the way in which you want me to go. And that is only learned over time. That's not a natural occurring substance in human biology, you know? But
Mhm.
that comes, you can't learn that without suffering. It requires his grace to get you there. And I've said the analogy, and the last thing I'll say and hand it back is, I've said this analogy on this podcast before. On one side of the river is knowledge, on the other side of the river is wisdom. Okay. You can have all the book smarts and be told a million times like something, and you have the knowledge. But You don't get to be wise until you've crossed that bridge, and that bridge is known as experience. You can't get to the wisdom without those experiences, and slowly over time, one step one step across the bridge after another, you'll get to the point in which you're now the wise one. You took that knowledge, applied experience, and you got to wisdom. But you can't get there without the experience, which is the suffering, I think. I may add another layer to that bridge.
Yeah, yeah.
That's experience through suffering most of the time.
Yeah. The old adage, character is tested through adversity.
Romans
But
5,
that's a
suffering
great
produces
picture.
endurance, endurance,
Yeah.
character, and character, hope.
Yep. And that's really what we're talking about here. Like, why do we call suffering God's grace? Why do we pull out that point from this passage? It's because God saw the future of Zechariah's family. Zechariah didn't see it, but by God's grace, he stayed with Zechariah, and Zechariah got to experience him being mute for 9 months and what that did to his family, how the friction probably was, in his marriage for 9 months and him not being able to talk and the things he had to adjust. Like, I can't imagine how much just personal growth in his own life that he experienced when his son was born and he was finally able to talk. And then you think about, I don't know, obviously they're a little advanced in years, so who knows how old they were, or I should say how old John the Baptist was whenever they passed away, but they
Yeah,
clearly knew. And then, well, the next passage was Zechariah's song. We won't get into that, but he's praising God for how God
point.
uses, um family, but also for the future of how God's going to use John the Baptist. So his faith clearly grew exponentially. And
Good point.
to your story that you shared, like, God stayed with you. He worked through those things. And like you said, look at you now.
Well,
You're
here's the
hosting 2
thing.
podcasts. And it's just adding to our testimony, which
That's
to
right. You're
me
building your witness.
is
Exactly.
exactly building your witness. Like, I'm already a Christian. I'm already saved by the grace of God. I am immortal. I've already started my eternal life. The time my heart stops here, my dad always says, when my heart stops here, or he says, my last gasp here is my first shout there. Like, it's just a transition. And living that way with that perspective, of course, is hope, it's faith filled. But while I'm still here, it's all about my testimony and how I can help others. And I build my testimony through looking back on where God has taken me and looking at it from the perspective of his grace in those times where I struggled, where I had doubt, where I failed.
Yeah. So, how do our listeners translate this into the secular business world? And it's not that difficult. It's essentially simply this, Jordan. It's like what you have learned throughout your career as the leader of an organization, the onus and the requirement and the impetus, whatever word you want to use, is on you to teach and to pass that on. So, take the folks who work for you and make them better through the experiences you've learned and your suffer, right, or what you've done wrong. And this is where you can aside pride and put aside how your invulnerabilities, and be vulnerable with your team and be like, here's why I face this problem, here's where I got it wrong and why. Don't walk in as the boss who has all the answers. What you have to walk in as the boss who didn't have them, but here's how they learned them, and here's how they can take those lessons and use them for their good. That is how you take this Christian world and this Christian experience and apply it to a secular world. It's just passing this information on, but it requires, just like faith, humility to do it. It just requires humility to do it. Because a lot of folks are like, well, I can't have them see me in that light. And like, it's Jesus taught us, if he taught us nothing else, it was everything is the upside down world. Where you see weakness, he builds strength, right?
Yep,
Can't
yep.
and in his world, you can't have strength without weakness. So you actually in reality, showing vulnerability to your team makes them put you on a higher pedestal, and it builds trust and it builds camaraderie and it builds cohesion amongst your team, because then you're now believable. Whereas, the secular world would tell you, don't show chinks in your armor. I'm going to tell you, show them all your chinks, and and they're going to follow you closer because you're building fibers. You're growing fibers together as a team, which will make that bond stronger as you go forward. And they're going to trust you more. They're going to give you more grace, and they're going to let you lead them because they bought in. You can't lead anybody that doesn't like you or doesn't want to be there. They'll listen, but there's you can and you have the ability to transactionally lead them, but what you should seek is the ability to transformatively lead them. And that's where and the difference between transaction and transformative is the invulnerability and honesty, or vulnerability and honesty. That's what I think, Jordan.
Yeah, you mentioned you can't lead people if they don't like you. If they don't like you, trust you. And I when you were talking about that, I was thinking you and I did a podcast a couple weeks ago on the lesson out of Luke 2, where Jesus, 12-year-old Jesus, was left in the temple. Really wasn't left. He intentionally stayed there, and his parents went on without him, thinking he was part of the group. But anyways, the last verse in that passage says, I'll actually just turn to it.
And maybe this is where we should end for some time. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. But the last verse says, Luke 2:52, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men.
Good
So
point.
yes, it's not we shouldn't lead, we shouldn't do things just to get likes, right? Just so people like us. But to your point, they have to like us and trust us if we're going to lead them. And so this isn't just about, oh, I'm the boss, so you need to do what I say. Obviously, that can happen, but that's going to be a toxic culture.
Yeah, and it's good, and I would pivot a little bit more, like, maybe the phrasing, "Get them to like you," is the wrong one. Get them to know you, and it's the same way with our faith. So if you're gonna allow God to lead in your life, how are you gonna do that? The best way to do is to get to know him. You've got to get to know him, and how do you get to know him? You go and you read scripture, right? Because he's in there, and he tells you who he is and his character, and then you just start having conversations, and so the more they know about you and the more we know about him, and I'm pointing up now, the more likely we are to trust their lead. Period. Case closed.
And from an organizational leadership standpoint, they're going to get to know you more when you're more real. And when you're more real, they're going to know that because they're going to see your vulnerability. They're going to see how you acknowledge your failures and how you're open about talking about that for the purpose of empowering your team to do better, empowering your team to learn from your failure. John Maxwell, his latest book, which I haven't read it. I haven't even read a description, but just going off the title, it's titled How to Get a Return on Failure. And just thinking of that phrase right there, like getting a return, like a return on investment, how to get a return on your failure is all about seeing the opportunities that come from it. And I think from the point we're making today is seeing those past failures, seeing what you walk through as God's grace. Like when we see it as God's grace, that's going to cause us to trust him more. It's like, oh, you weren't just like punishing me. You actually were walking with me despite the consequences that came. You're walking with me and you are growing me in that process. And I think
It is.
I'll just make one more point and then I'll give you a closing word, Eric, is that as leaders, for those that we lead, they're also going to fail. So we've had a podcast, one of our first ones was talking about being selective. So yes, we have to be selective. There may be times where you have to let somebody go. You have to fire somebody, terminate them in some way. But certainly you need to recognize failures in your team and not just issue the consequence. You need to use it as a way to offer grace and walk with them in the same way that we've been talking about this whole episode and how God walks with us. He's our example. We need to do the same with those that are looking to our leadership. With that, I'll leave it to you, Eric.
Yeah, I think Jordan, the takeaway here is for the folks that it's really about conflict. It's really about suffering, and you don't necessarily need to seek suffering, and you don't need to seek conflict. But what we do need to do is embrace it, recognize it for what it is. Curses become blessings. Know that, trust that. So as you're walking through something, the wise move is to take a look around and be like, this really stinks right now, but what can I learn from this? What am I learning as we go? And being willing to learn something. Embrace the suck, Jordan. You've heard that before.
But yeah, I've seen
But
patches of
yes. So you're gonna go through things that are really gonna be not enjoyable. You don't have to seek it unless you're some kind of weirdo, but embrace it. Know that you will learn something from it if you're willing to do it. If you're willing to sit back and debrief. And so just like what we say in the aviation world, it's less about the flight and more about the debrief. Like you're gonna do the flight's going to happen. Things are going to go on, but it's more important to step back once that's over and then assess. So what did we just do? What went wrong? What went well? And then how am I going to learn from it? So once you get through that suffering or that episode, sit back and debrief it. Maybe it's with your wife over a cup of coffee, or maybe it's with a couple buddies you trust. Like, fellas, you were here with me as I went through this. Like, what did you see and what can we take going forward from this thing? And that's it. Embrace it.
It's great. Well,
Embrace it.
that's a great way to end. That's a great challenge. So for listeners, that's our challenge. I really challenge you to take some time this week, certainly following this episode, get a piece of paper and think back, either just something in your personal life or maybe even in your professional life
It's good.
as a leader. Take a piece of paper, write down a failure you might have had. Write down even a failure on your team that someone has had and
Or a
how
tough
you
moment or a tough experience.
yeah, tough experience because as I've learned, as I've heard said before, is we don't learn from experience. We learn from evaluated experience. And that means having the debrief, like Eric just said. Sit down, jot some things out, ask people that know you from that time, like, hey, where did you see me fail? Where could I have done better? And again, look at it from God's grace. When you walk through some terrible things, look at it as God's grace on you that he could have just went and found somebody else to do what he was asking you to do, but by his grace, he's stuck with you. And we're not going to know that unless we really reflect on that. And a great way to do it is to journal it. So with that, I'll leave you and we'll see you on the next episode.